In September of 52 BC, in a valley now covered by French vineyards and quiet farmland, 380,000 men gathered to decide the future of Western civilization. On one side stood Julius Caesar with 50,000 Roman legionaries and 10,000 Germanic auxiliary cavalry. On the other stood the combined might of Gaul, 80,000 warriors trapped inside the fortress of Alésia, and 250,000 more marching to their rescue. The arithmetic was brutal. The Romans were outnumbered nearly 7-1. They had no escape route, no possibility of retreat, no reinforcements coming. They were caught between two armies that wanted nothing more than to see every last Roman dead. Any rational commander would have withdrawn. The military textbooks of the ancient world, the writings of Xenophon, the traditions passed down from Alexander, all agreed on one principle: never allow yourself to be surrounded. Encirclement meant death. But Julius Caesar was not a rational commander. He was a gambler, playing with the highest possible stakes, his own survival. And on those September days, he made a decision that military historians still struggle to explain. He ordered his men to trap themselves. To understand why 330,000 men converged on this remote plateau, we must first understand what Gaul had become by 52 BC. This is Narrate History Arena. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. For 6 years, Caesar had waged a campaign of systematic conquest. He had crossed the Rhine to punish Germanic tribes. He had invaded Britain twice to demonstrate Roman reach. He had burned villages, executed chieftains, and taken hundreds of thousands of Gauls as slaves to be sold in the markets of Rome. The numbers are staggering. Ancient sources, including Caesar's own accounts, suggest that the Gallic Wars resulted in approximately 1 million deaths and another million enslaved. Entire tribes were erased from existence. The Eburones, who had dared to ambush a Roman legion, were hunted to near extinction, men, women, and children killed without mercy. By the winter of 53 to 52 BC, the surviving tribes had reached a breaking point. The Druids, the priestly class who maintained Gallic religious traditions, watched their sacred groves being cut down for Roman siege works. The nobles saw their lands confiscated and redistributed to Roman allies. The warriors saw their sons taken as hostages to ensure good behavior. The oppression had become unbearable. Gaul was ready to explode. In the winter months, a name began to spread from village to village, from tribal council to tribal council. Vercingetorix, the young prince of the Arverni tribe, was not merely another chieftain seeking glory. He was something Gaul had never seen before, a unifier. Vercingetorix understood a truth that had eluded his predecessors. The Gauls had always fought as individual tribes, nursing ancient grudges, refusing to cooperate even when facing a common enemy. This disunity had allowed Rome to defeat them piecemeal, conquering one tribe while the others watched, then turning on the watchers. But Vercingetorix possessed a gift for persuasion that bordered on the supernatural. He rode through the snow-covered lands of central Gaul, speaking to assemblies of hereditary enemies. He spoke of freedom. He spoke of the bones of their ancestors being trampled by Roman sandals. He spoke of a future where their children would be born as slaves. At Bibracte, the assembly of tribes did something unprecedented. More than 40 tribes that had been killing each other for generations agreed to elect Vercingetorix as supreme commander of all Gallic forces. For the first time in recorded history, Gaul spoke with a single voice. Vercingetorix's strategy was as brilliant as it was brutal. He understood that the Roman legions could not be defeated in open battle. The pilum, the gladius, the interlocking shield formations, these had conquered the known world. Charging directly at a Roman line was suicide. Vercingetorix chose a different path. He ordered the scorched earth policy. Burn your own villages, poison your own wells, destroy your own crops. If the Romans cannot find food, they will starve before they can fight. The psychological weight of this order cannot be overstated. Vercingetorix was asking his people to destroy everything they owned, the homes their grandfathers had built, the fields their families had cultivated for generations, on the promise of eventual freedom. It was a sacrifice that required absolute faith in their leader. The Gauls complied. Across central Gaul, the smoke of burning villages darkened the sky. In the Roman camp, Caesar faced a situation more desperate than most historical accounts acknowledge. The scorched earth policy was working. Roman foraging parties returned empty-handed. The supply lines stretching back to the province, modern Provence, were under constant attack. The legionaries, who consumed approximately 3,000 calories per day during active campaigning, were beginning to feel the pinch of reduced rations. But Caesar's problems extended far beyond logistics. In Rome, his political enemies were circling. The conservative faction in the Senate, led by men like Cato and Bibulus, had spent years trying to strip Caesar of his command. They accused him of waging illegal wars, of enriching himself at the Republic's expense, of harboring tyrannical ambitions. If Caesar failed in Gaul, if he returned to Rome without a decisive victory, his enemies would destroy him. He would face prosecution, exile, possibly death. His only protection was his legions and his victories. This was not merely about glory. It was about survival. When Caesar's scouts first reported Vercingetorix's position at Alésia, any reasonable assessment would have concluded that attack was impossible. Alésia sat atop a diamond-shaped plateau approximately 1,500 meters long and 400 meters wide, rising 150 meters above the surrounding plain. Two rivers, the Ouse and the Oseraine, protected its flanks. The slopes were steep enough to exhaust attacking infantry before they even reached the walls. Behind those walls, Vercingetorix had gathered 80,000 of his finest warriors, the elite of the Gallic tribesmen who had sworn blood oaths to die rather than submit. Vercingetorix believed he had found the perfect position. The Romans could not assault the walls without suffering catastrophic casualties. They could not starve him out quickly, because his supplies would last at least 30 days. And before those 30 days elapsed, the relief army would arrive. He had already sent his cavalry out, under cover of darkness, carrying a single message to every tribe in Gaul. Come, bring every man who can carry a spear. The final battle approaches. What Vercingetorix failed to understand was that Caesar did not see a fortress. He saw a prison, and he intended to seal the door. At 6 a.m. on a morning in late September, Caesar assembled his senior officers and issued an order that made them question his sanity. The legions would not assault Alésia. They would not attempt a simple blockade. Instead, they would construct a complete ring of fortifications encircling the entire plateau, 18 kilometers of walls, ditches, and towers. This was the circumvallation, a wall facing inward to trap Vercingetorix. But Caesar was not finished. Intelligence reports confirmed what Caesar already suspected. The Gallic relief army was gathering, and its size exceeded anything the Romans had ever faced. Conservative estimates placed it at 250,000. Some reports suggested 300,000 warriors marching toward Alésia. Caesar's response defied every principle of military strategy. He ordered the construction of a second ring of fortifications, the Contravallation, facing outward, 21 kilometers in length. The Romans would voluntarily trap themselves between two armies. For approximately 3 weeks, 60,000 men worked with desperate intensity. The Roman legionary was as much an engineer as a warrior, and this was engineering on a scale never before attempted. The inner fortifications facing Alésia consisted of a trench 20 feet wide with vertical sides to prevent easy crossing, a second trench filled with water diverted from the rivers, a rampart 12 feet high topped with a wooden palisade, guard towers every 80 feet, positioned for overlapping fields of fire. But the true genius and horror of Roman military engineering lay in the obstacle systems planted before the walls. The Scipi were tree trunks with sharpened branches projecting outward at chest and face height. Charging warriors would impale themselves before reaching the ditches. The lilia, named after the lily flower they resembled from above, were conical pits 3 feet deep with fire-hardened stakes at the bottom, covered with brush and scattered earth. Thousands of these hidden death traps dotted the approaches. A man stepping onto one would slide downward, his own momentum driving the stake through his foot, calf, or thigh. The stimuli were the cruelest innovation. Iron barbs the length of a finger, buried in the ground with their points upward. In the chaos of an assault, with dust and smoke obscuring vision, warriors would step on them and be crippled instantly. This was industrial killing. The ground itself had become a weapon. By the 3rd week of the siege, starvation had begun to hollow out the fortress. 80,000 warriors consumed food at a terrifying rate. The horses were slaughtered first, then the pack animals, then the dogs. Grain reserves that should have lasted a month were depleted in half that time. Vercingetorix faced an impossible choice. The Mandubii, the local tribe whose fortress Alésia actually was, made a desperate request. The women, children, elderly, and sick consumed food but could not fight. Perhaps if they were expelled, the Romans would accept them as slaves and feed them. At worst, it would extend the supplies for the warriors. At approximately 9 a.m. on a cold October morning, the gates of Alésia opened. Thousands of civilians walked down the hill toward the Roman lines. They carried nothing. They wore threadbare clothing, inadequate for the autumn cold. They called out, offering themselves as slaves in exchange for bread. Caesar watched from a tower. According to his own account, he gave his orders without hesitation. They will not be admitted. They will not be fed. They will not be accepted as prisoners. For 5 days, the civilians remained trapped in no man's land. They died of exposure, of starvation, of despair, within sight of their own families inside Alésia and the Roman soldiers who refused to help them. This was psychological warfare in its most calculated form. Caesar wanted the warriors inside Alésia to hear their own families dying. He wanted despair to erode their will to resist. Modern military psychology has a term for what those Roman soldiers experienced: moral injury, the psychological damage that occurs when a person witnesses or participates in actions that violate their fundamental moral beliefs. We can only guess at what the legionaries felt, standing on those walls, listening to children cry themselves to death. The historical record is silent on this point. Perhaps that silence tells us everything. At approximately 2 p.m. on October 2nd, the relief army appeared. The Gallic cavalry crested the western hills first, their armor glinting in the pale autumn sunlight. Behind them came the infantry columns, a human wave that seemed to have no end. Tribal standards from every corner of Gaul fluttered in the wind. War drums created a rhythmic thunder that echoed off the valley walls. Inside Alésia, the besieged warriors saw their salvation approaching. A roar of triumph erupted from the plateau. 80,000 voices screaming with renewed hope. On the Roman walls, 50,000 men looked at the hills and saw death. The first coordinated assault came at dawn on October 3rd. Commius of the Atrebates, one of the relief army's commanders, led 40,000 warriors against the western sector of the outer fortifications. Simultaneously, Vercingetorix launched his own assault from inside Alésia against the inner walls. For the first time in military history, an army fought a siege in 2 directions at once. The sound was physical, a wall of noise that overwhelmed the senses. The crash of thousands of shields, the whistle of arrows, the screams of the wounded and dying, the barked orders of centurions trying to maintain formation. The obstacle systems proved their worth in blood. The first wave of Gallic warriors hit the concealed Lilia pits. Men shrieked as stakes punched through their legs. The charge stumbled as warriors tripped over their fallen comrades. The stimuli claimed hundreds more. Iron spikes tearing through leather sandals, crippling men who had been running moments before. The Gauls kept coming. They climbed over the bodies of their own dead to reach the walls. The Romans fought with the mechanical efficiency that had conquered the world. When one man fell, another stepped forward to fill the gap. They rotated in shifts, fresh sentries replacing exhausted ones, but there were only so many fresh troops. By 3 p.m., the northwestern section was in crisis. Vercivilanus, Vercingetorix's cousin, had identified the weak point, a section where the fortifications crossed difficult terrain, where the walls were slightly lower, where the defenders were stretched thin. He led 60,000 picked warriors against this single sector, the 2 Roman legions defending it. Approximately 10,000 men faced 6-to-1 odds. Caesar received the reports at his command post. The northwestern section was failing. Labienus, his most trusted subordinate, was fighting in the front rank, personally killing men with his own sword, a sign of absolute desperation. The decision point had arrived. If Caesar sent his reserves to the northwest, he would weaken other sectors that might collapse. If he held his reserves, the northwest might break entirely, and the Gauls would pour through the gap. Caesar chose a middle path, and a dramatic gesture. He sent 6,000 reinforcements to stabilize the line. He ordered his Germanic cavalry to ride out and around the fortifications, hitting the Gallic rear. He took his remaining reserve of 4,000 men personally. Most critically, he did not hide. The Roman general's cloak was deliberately conspicuous. Every Roman soldier could see it. Every Gaul could see it. Caesar was announcing to both armies, "The commander is here. Watch what happens next." At approximately 5 p.m., three forces collided at the northwestern breach. Labienus's exhausted legionaries held the wall by sheer desperation. Caesar's reinforcements arrived from behind, fresh troops pushing forward into the chaos, and from the rear, the Germanic cavalry, 4,000 savage horsemen who fought for gold rather than glory, crashed into the Gallic assault force. The Gauls at the breach found themselves trapped exactly as they had hoped to trap the Romans. Unable to advance through Roman steel, unable to retreat through the press of their own men, they died where they stood. The Germanic cavalry showed no mercy. These were warriors from beyond the Rhine who collected the heads of their enemies as trophies. They cut down fleeing Gauls with savage efficiency, earning their payment in blood. The sight of their elite assault force being slaughtered broke something in the relief army. The warriors who had been preparing for a final push saw their comrades dying in a trap. Panic spread faster than any signal. At 5:45 p.m., the Gallic relief army, the largest force Gaul had ever assembled, broke and ran. The morning of October 5th brought silence. From Alésia's walls, Vercingetorix had watched his last hope dissolve in chaos. The relief army that was supposed to save Gaul had fled into the darkness, abandoning him. He called his war council for the final time. Some chieftains advocated fighting to the death. Others, more pragmatic, pointed out that their families were also trapped in the fortress. The debate continued through the night. Vercingetorix ended it. "I began this war, not for my own purposes, but for the freedom of all," he reportedly said. "Since fortune has turned against us, I offer myself to you. Either kill me to satisfy the Romans, or deliver me to them alive." At 10 a.m. on October 6th, the gates of Alésia opened for the final time. He circled Caesar's seat once, a last gesture of Gallic pride. He dismounted. He stripped off his armor and laid his weapons at Caesar's feet. The man who had united 40 tribes knelt before the seated Roman. In that moment, independent Gaul died forever. The statistics of Alésia are difficult to comprehend. Approximately 40,000 Gauls died in the fighting. Thousands more died in the pursuit. The relief army scattered to the winds, never to reassemble. Inside Alésia, 80,000 warriors surrendered and were processed as prisoners. Caesar's treatment of the prisoners followed political logic rather than mercy. Warriors from tribes Rome needed as allies, the Aedui, the Arverni, were released to return home, a gesture designed to create grateful clients. But 40,000 others were distributed among the legions as slaves, payment for years of brutal campaigning. Vercingetorix received special treatment. He was kept alive, well-fed, carefully guarded, a living trophy of Rome's greatest victory. For 6 years, he remained in Roman custody, waiting. In 46 BC, during Caesar's quadruple triumph in Rome, Vercingetorix was paraded through the streets in chains. After the ceremony, he was taken to the Tullianum prison and ritually strangled. Alésia's impact extends far beyond military history. Without this victory, Caesar would have faced political destruction in Rome. Instead, the conquest of Gaul made him the wealthiest and most popular man in the Republic. The loyalty of his veterans, forged in moments like the Northwestern Breach, would follow him across the Rubicon into civil war. The cultural transformation was equally profound. Within a generation, Gallic nobles were sending their sons to study in Rome. Latin replaced Celtic languages across most of the region. Roman roads, Roman law, and Roman religion spread through the conquered territory. The civilization that emerged, Gallo-Roman culture, would shape France, Belgium, and parts of Germany and Switzerland for 2,000 years. The fortifications have long since crumbled. The ditches have filled in. Vineyards now grow where legionaries once fought and died. But the questions Alésia raises remain uncomfortable. What does it cost to build a civilization? How many must die for empire? And when we celebrate military genius, whose suffering do we choose to forget? The wind still blows through the valley of Alésia. If you listen carefully, some say, you can almost hear the echoes, the clash of steel, the screams of the dying, and somewhere in the distance, the crying of children who were never given bread. History remembers Julius Caesar as one of the greatest commanders who ever lived. It remembers Vercingetorix as a tragic hero who nearly saved his people. It rarely remembers the Mandubia civilians who died in the cold mud between the walls, belonging to neither army, mourned by neither side. Perhaps that silence is the truest legacy of Alésia, a reminder that the greatest victories are often purchased with the suffering of those whose names history never bothered to record. Do not forget to subscribe to Narrate History Arena and hit the notification bell so you don't miss a single moment.